Tonight on Mark Latham's Outsiders, gender diversity PC madness. It's hitting our schools, and we've got an example of it in the aged care sector, both ends of the age spectrum, the young and the old. We've also got an all-star panel with Sam Armitage from Channel 7 and Greg Walsh from Rebel Australia. We've got Zeg's Cartoons, The Outsiders, Our House, where you have your say, and we've got the Left Lunatic of the Week. Wait till you see him. I'm coming to you in front of the Steelworks Hotel in the wonderful outsider destination, Port Kembla in New South Wales. We've got a great show coming up. Thanks for watching. Trigger warning viewers, you've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, proudly Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs program. We just try and give you the information for you to make up your own mind about the big issues affecting our country and beyond. We try to give you the other side of the story, the things you don't normally see in the mainstream media, and there's plenty of that. So our show effectively is all about straight talk, all important straight talk, to get the facts out there in a non-PC way. No list of taboo subjects or words that can't be spoken, no trigger warnings. In reality, no snowflake culture. We just try and get down to the facts. So remember our website. It's all important to go to that website, marklathamsoutsiders.com. You can see it there on the screen, marklathamsoutsiders.com. Register for all our Rebel Australia activities. So thanks very much for watching, and at the top of the show I want to address one of the issues that have got major concern around Australia, particularly among parents but citizens at large, and that is the whole question of gender diversity being pushed as a PC identity agenda. It seems to be right through our schools and universities, compulsory now for young people to be thinking in terms of gender diversity, and it's having a very corrosive impact on institutions in our schools, so for young people, but I've also got an example of how it's damaging for the elderly in the aged care sector. Now, the first example I've got comes from the Australian newspaper earlier in the week. They had the headline of "Call to Strip Gender Talk from Sex Education Classes," and this is an amazing report that at Flinders University, 2 academics have delivered a report recommending that in sex education courses in our schools, words like penis and vagina wouldn't be used, just wiped out of the curriculum. Now really, how can you teach sex education without using basic words, descriptive words like penis and vagina when talking, say, to a 14 or 15-year-old high school class? It's just plain absurd. Why are they saying this? To get rid of words that would be a regular part of sex education. It's in deference, so offence isn't caused to transgender students. I mean, really? Are we going to now devise the school curriculum around the needs of the 0.1% as opposed to the 99.9% of students who haven't got an issue with their sexuality? I mean, in the recent census in Australia, only 1,300 adults describe themselves as neither male nor female. That is, out of 23.4 million people, 0.005%, just 1,300 transgender adults in Australia. We can't devise mainstream education courses around the needs of such a small minority, particularly when there's no evidence that a 14 or 15-year-old student sitting in a high school class that is thinking in terms of transgender would be offended and spun out and triggered, totally melt down over the use of words like penis and vagina. There's no evidence that this is an offensive, unacceptable set of terminology for such a student. And the madness goes on in terms of pushing gender diversity. There was a school in South Australia last week that did a fundraising drive, a worthy cause, raising money for needy kids in Africa. But as part of it, the whole idea was for boys in the school to wear dresses. And here's the picture now of Paul Luke, the principal of Craigburn Primary School in South Australia. That's him on the chair, in a dress. Now, what's happened to Australian education that to raise money the principal needs to wear a dress? And you've got the students all in the background there. All the boys had to wear a dress. I'm not too sure they would necessarily be comfortable with that later in life. Maybe they would be. But aren't there bigger priorities in Australian education than principals wearing dresses? I mean, we've fallen behind nations like Kazakhstan, a third world country, on the international league tables of academic achievement. We've got real problems in teaching the basics in English, maths and science. and the principal wearing a dress and making that the showpiece of the school is a major distraction from the basics that need to be taught in our schools. And then it goes on. It's not just the young people affected by gender diversity PC madness, it's also happening for the elderly. I've got a document that's been passed on to Mark Latham's Outsiders from Uniting Care Life Assist in Victoria. Uniting Care Life Assist is the welfare arm of the Uniting Church. It's run these days by a former minister in the Victorian Labor government, so you can see the leftist influence. Now, within this organisation, which is there to organise care for the elderly, so the elderly or their families ring up, say mum or dad's got too old for independent life, they need care assist packages, that's the nature of this service. There's a group within Uniting Care Life Assist that's the LGBTI staff group. Now, why you need to be so divisive to have a staff group that's based on sexuality? What's sexuality got to do with looking after the aged and frail? I'm yet to understand that. But to have a staff group based on sexuality, I understand there are also other staff groups based on race, based on gender. It just divides the organisation. And what's happened is that the LGBTI staff group have sent out this order to other staff members, I can bring it up on the screen, of words to avoid in the workplace. So this is de-gendering words that your average elderly Australian would regard as commonplace, a regular part of their life. So you can see here the document. It was taken off a phone and sent to us, so it's not as clear as we'd like, but I can just read it out to you. Words to avoid: sir, madam, ma'am. And you've got to instead use the person's name. You've got to avoid ladies and gentlemen in the second line. Instead say people's names, welcome everybody. In the third line, husband and wife can't be used. Have they become offensive terms for Australians aged 80 or 90? I don't think so. You've got to say partner instead. And in the fourth line, son, daughter, niece and nephew have been outlawed, according to this staff group. Instead, you've got to say the words family member, next of kin. And in the next line, you can't use homosexual as a noun. You've got to use a term that the person identifies with, e.g. a gay man, a transgender woman. Hermaphrodite is out. You've got to say intersex. I'm sure older Australians don't really have all that much experience and use with the word intersex. And then it goes on, lifestyle choice. What could be offensive about using the word, the expression lifestyle choice? That's outlawed. Instead, you've got to say sexual orientation or expression. And finally, transvestite is out. You've got to say transgender man or woman. And they give an example there at the bottom. You can't say John is a homosexual. Instead, you've got to say John is a gay man. So this is PC language policing gone crazy. I spoke to Uniting Care about this just yesterday, and they said that this is a document that went up in July. I know for a fact it predates that. It was around in June. It's been around in July. We don't know how long it remained at Uniting Care. It was confusing information I received. But to have this at all, it's just so divisive. The whole nature of identity politics is divisive. To subdivide the nation on the basis of race, gender, in this case sexuality. What does this say in the workplace they've got? They must be running it like a commune, where a certain group, the LGBTI staff group, can send out these orders, words to avoid, and obviously other staff have complained and objective, so much so that it's been sent on to our organisation. This is corrosive and divisive and destructive inside of these workplaces, and at the bottom line, pretty well irrelevant to their core task, which is to look after the elderly and organise care packages for them. I think for most elderly Australians it would be quite distressing to find out that common words like son, daughter, niece and nephew, most of us have got those, son, daughter, niece and nephew can't be used, and expressions like lifestyle choice, verboten, out the door, banned. So it is really quite ridiculous, this gender diversity stuff. It's confusing and divisive. We've got to end this PC madness. Organisations like this really need to pull their heads in and do a better job for the people they're servicing, because I can tell you what, at Life Assist, Uniting Care, you've got some disgruntled staff there who don't like this stuff and don't like being bossed around by a staff group based on identity when all they want to do is go to work and undertake the noble cause of looking after elderly Australians and helping them out in their moments of need. So that's a genuine problem. It's not just in our schools and universities, not just in government departments, not just in government agencies. We're now finding out leftist welfare organisations are running diversity, gender diversity, PC madness. We can do a lot better than that, and one of the places to start, of course, I've got to put this plug in. I know it's a little bit unrelated, but I just want to mention the fact that I've got a new book coming out called Outsiders, aptly named Outsiders, being launched by Alan Jones in Sydney on Thursday, and it's a collection of all the arguments that I mount against political correctness, against identity politics, against cultural Marxism. Hopefully it becomes a good read, a good Christmas present for all the outsider rallies, to buy it up and understand the arguments that we're making in greater detail than we can afford here on the show. But thanks again for watching. We've got a very good panel coming up with Samantha Armitage and Greg Walsh, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the show, where for our panel discussion I'm joined by Greg Walsh, Sydney-based lawyer and academic, and Samantha Armitage from 7 Sunrise. We normally have a chat on a Friday morning in the spin-free zone, but it's great to have you here. Pleasure. Now, just to fill in our overseas viewers, you come from a country background. You've worked your way through the system to be Australia's preeminent female TV presenter. I think I can say that.
Thanks, Mark.
Very popular show.
Thank you.
And I think it's fair to say that you're not left-wing inclined.
Well, I have a father who's a farmer, and I had a fairly conservative upbringing. However, you know, I sort of make my own judgments on things, and
well, your judgments are very good,
Dad on things.
Because in terms of politics, you excelled as an expert in political judgment because you thought Donald Trump would win the US presidential election. 99.9% of the media is all saying it's all over, Hillary's won. How did you arrive at the conclusion that Trump was a winner?
That was not my politics, that was my
as a political analyst,
that was a private bet that I made, and I won quite a bit of money on Trump winning because I had him a long way up when he was paying 100 to 1. Only because I was in the TAB for other reasons. Because I think that particular scenario, I'd heard Dad, I'd heard people in the country feeling that, complaining about the disconnect, getting angry about the disconnect between the city and the media and what the majority of people out there were thinking. And I could see it myself. I could see that a lot of what I was hearing in the commentary within the media was really out of touch with the average person. You could see the popularity of Pauline Hanson, Brexit. There was, you know, as my father rants, the silent majority, and I kind of just sensed that the silent majority was just going to come crashing down there because they were getting very frustrated.
Do you find though that this gap between the inner city elites and the common sense views and the suburbs and country areas is getting wider in Australia? And is this a big challenge inside the media? Because the media get out of touch with those views. Obviously, commercially, it's bad for them. And in the past, we've had some left feminists in Australia attack you as a disgrace to feminism because you don't fall into line. How much pressure is there to be part of that cabal of left feminist female commentators in Australia?
Look, I'm a 40-year-old woman now, and it's not my first rodeo. I've been a journo for many years, and I'm pretty tough. So I don't conform to any of that stuff. I do what I do. I host a commercial breakfast show. I know what I can do. I know how clever I am. I try not to be too clever for my own good most of the time. And I'm from that generation that just sort of quietly goes about their business. I've used Julie Bishop as a bit of a mentor in that. You just get on with the job. As you say, I'm a country girl. I wasn't raised to complain about things. I was that seen and not heard generation. You get on with it. You do your bit. I sort of think there's a few glass ceilings I've broken through accidentally. With drive and hard work, but I've never played the woman card. I've never thought that I didn't get a job because I was a woman. I could always hold my own, and I've done reasonably well with that.
What's the best advice you've received off Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop?
Who's
an achiever in her own right.
And gets on with the job.
Yeah,
she would never play the woman card either.
Yeah,
and she
doesn't plead victim.
Yeah, and she holds her own with a room full of men all the time. No specific advice. I've just sort of, you know, I've looked to her as being a fairly good role model.
Well, there's some other advice for you out there. You had a stoush recently with Kathy Griffin, famous for holding up the severed Trump head. Let's have a look at that footage.
A neighbour.
Because think about it, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble, according to you, Sam. Who? Way to take my back, girl.
Well, no, I'm a journalist, Kathy.
Yeah,
I'm here to ask you
questions.
And
I
it
got
was
it. Yeah, I
a
got
big
your number,
thing,
Sam.
and that's
Yeah.
why.
You're like a white Trump voter in America. I know you do.
No,
It's not a
that's
big
not
thing.
fair,
Calm
Cassie.
down. You're fine. Everyone's fine.
I'm playing the devil's advocate.
That's it. I'm going to meet you in an alley.
There's a real leftist tendency, isn't there, that Kathy expects you to be exactly like her. It's sort of like an authoritarian standover merchant.
It was, well, she's a comedian. I wasn't applying politics that day. I thought she's just a little bit
Kooky.
unwell. Kooky's one word for it. Look, comedians are an interesting mob of people to interview. They're very rarely like they are on stage or, on TV. And to me, as a journo, I know I keep saying that, but I sense that she was happy to give it but not take it. And personally, I didn't feel that the beheading joke was very funny. Trump or not Trump, I think she thought she could get away with it because everyone
Yeah, it
hates
upset
Trump.
Trump's family, including his young son.
Yeah, and which but Trump's
that.
big enough and ugly enough to defend himself. But
Not
from
the
a
son.
we're a breakfast television show. There are families watching us. I thought I had a role there and an opportunity to just sort of call her on that, which nobody else did when she did that promo tour for her comedy show.
Yeah, no, they all just fall into line.
No.
But the other thing happening in the media, Sam, you're often a victim of paparazzi and tabloid sensationalism. I want to bring you in, Greg, as a lawyer. We've had recently the sensational Australian defamation judgment where Rebel Wilson, defamed by Bauer Media, they said she made up a backstory and they obviously had some fairly vicious intent about damaging her. She's received a defamation payout, an Australian record, of over $4 million in extra costs for Bauer Media. Bad luck for them. Do you think this is the right kind of judgment and sends a big message to these women's tabloid magazines to clean up their act?
Well, with defamation law, you always have the challenge of respecting different rights. People have a right to reputation. You also, against that, have important right of freedom of expression, especially in a democracy. It's important that people are free to express their views about different issues. The tabloid issue is a little bit different in that, I suppose, do people really need to know this information about celebrities? Is it really that important? So in these kind of issues, perhaps there isn't as strong as an importance placed on the need to have an expression of views in a democracy. So it's always going to be challenging. That seems to be an excessive payout for what she was alleged to have done, but that's what the court decided. It's always up to the media company to appeal that if they think the decision was unjust.
No sign of an appeal so far. Sam, your thoughts?
Look, I thought good on her in that scenario. I was surprised she won it. I thought she was very brave to take them on. I'm not sure what sort of... it's an interesting precedent. If it has set a precedent, it's an interesting one because it was a case that wasn't very clear-cut. And from my perspective, who I've personally been defamed many times by many tabloid institutions, the rubbish they will write. And it's a really vindictive genre in this country. I've looked at it for years, far worse than the English or the Americans will go. And I'm in this interesting situation where I'm a journalist, but now I've somehow become some kind, I don't like to admit that I'm a celebrity because I don't really feel like I am inside myself, but I've now become the interest of it. So I've got a foot in each camp. It's a bizarre way to be, but I'd sue them if I could. Some of the rubbish they write is outrageous.
Yeah, well, you've got rights of privacy, we all have.
But there's no...
Yeah, we support free speech, but when these campaigns are so deliberately and repetitively vindictive, I mean, I don't read these magazines, but I do see the headlines as I pass through the Woolworths checkout where I live in southwest Sydney, and Leighton and Beck Hewitt must have had 19 marriage breakups by now. It's an amazing fact that they're divorced one week and back together the next. So a lot of this stuff is just made up and vindictive, isn't it?
And I think the view is, oh, they're celebrities, suck it up, you earn good money, that's your job, you're just going to get bagged. And I mean, I can't speak for Beck and Leighton Hewitt, but I do. I see those two.
It's pretty rough, though, isn't it?
It's silly. It's just, they obviously find people who sell magazines and then they stick to them. And, it's either Kate Middleton's pregnant again or I'm dating Russell Crowe, who I've met once on set at work. I read it, and my mother will ring me and go, they're saying it's true. They just put the headline, it's true.
Well, I've always I want to get on those front pages, and when I have my sex change tomorrow, I'll be there. So there's hope for all of us.
You might if you do that.
Okay, there's a scoop. Now, the other big legal affairs issue around, Greg, is this terrible massacre in Las Vegas. In Australia, we had significant gun reform in 1996, and since then, touch wood, we haven't had a public massacre with these rapid-fire weapons. In the United States, they've just had their biggest, worst incident, but gun reform seems unlikely because of their constitutional amendment. How do you see it?
Well, that's right. It's unusual compared to Australia and the US. You do have the Constitution, the Second Amendment, which explicitly provides a right to bear arms, which makes it very difficult to restrain gun laws in the US. It's also different in Australia in terms of the culture, which is in the US compared to Australia. It's so much more a gun culture than we have in Australia. I was reading, and this just illustrates how different it is, I was reading that one of the Supreme Court justices, Scalia, invited another Supreme Court justice, the female justice, Kagan, to go on a hunting trip together. They went shooting together. So that just indicates how different the culture is compared to ours. It's unthinkable that something like that would happen in the High Court, that you get two High Court justices go shooting kangaroos. So there's the cultural problem, and there's also the legal problem in that the Constitution provides this explicit right to bear arms. And there's constant attempts in the US to try and introduce laws to restrict the right to bear arms, and there has been some success in that. But the US Supreme Court, in a range of decisions, there's a very key one that happened around 2008, which actually upheld the right of people to bear revolvers. And also there was a DC, the District of Columbia, law trying to require people to have trigger locks on their rifles, and the US Supreme Court ruled that to be unconstitutional as well, because the view was that if you're in your home and someone breaks in, then it's going to interfere with your right to have self-defense if your rifle had to be disassembled or had to have a trigger lock attached to it.
Yeah, the US culture is about self-defence, but I heard an expert talking about this yesterday, that Stephen Paddock as a lone wolf is very, very unusual, that he would go to so much planning, essentially get his ammunition and weapons in through suitcases, through the hotel lobby up to his hotel room, do all the planning, change the surveillance arrangements, that he would plan so thoroughly knowing at the end of it he would kill himself. Apparently it's very unusual that a lone wolf would act this way, but it makes the point for those poor concert goers, there was no self-defence. No. They could have had all the guns in the world down there on the ground, but they couldn't defend against this. The sensible thing is to have a limitation of access to the weapons, isn't it, Sam?
Look, there's that old Oscar Wilde quote, the right to bear arms is as ridiculous as the right to arm bears. You know, it's just, to us, you know, it is a complete, we'll never understand their culture and they just don't get it. We had someone from the NRA on the show this morning and they just don't get it. On no planet does a civilian need an automatic or a semi-automatic weapon, and this guy in Vegas had some kind of legal device that turned his semi-automatic weapon into, or, you know, it was firing 19 bullets a minute or something. I mean, it's just horrific. I don't know how they uphold that part of their constitution in this day and age when kids, I mean, after Sandy Hook, how is this still happening?
If they didn't act then,
if they didn't act when kids were mown down in a
Yep.
classroom, I mean, it's just, I just don't even know what to say about it. It is so beyond horrific. I can't imagine the trauma that these people will be going through.
From an Australian perspective, it is different. We have had successful gun reform, but I just want to make the point, there shouldn't be any green left demonisation of legitimate law-abiding shooters. I mean, in Australia, every 4 years we cheer at the Olympics for our shooters being successful. I visited 2 shooting ranges in Western Sydney recently where the people are law-abiding, sensible, they get about their sport. Shooting can be a legitimate sport. And the truth in Australia is that most of the problems we have with gun crime is illegal guns. And there needs to be, I think, more respect of recreational shooters in Australia as sports people, but equally a crackdown on the illegal guns getting into the country, stronger border protection and stronger policing. So I think it's very much trying to get the balance right between those two realities. Stop the public massacres, but don't demonise decent, law-abiding recreational shooters.
Yeah, and look, most country people who are registered, who aren't really recreational shooters, but doing it because of out of necessity, are incredibly you have to be law-abiding. The rules in this, you know, they're locked up. No one knows where the key. There are really tight laws around this, as there should be. But most people are doing the right thing.
Yep, and that needs to be recognised. Now, the other issue we have on the agenda, where, Greg, you've taken a particular interest, is the debate, not so much about same-sex marriage, but the religious freedoms protection that are needed if the yes vote is successful in Australia, which is what we're expecting. And on our Facebook page, Mark Latham's Outsiders, we've been screening some of the videos from Freedom for Faith that looks at the religious freedom consequences. And here's an expert lawyer from Canada talking about the difficulties they had once same-sex marriage was legalised in that country. Let's have a look.
We've seen universities that subscribe to traditional biblical marriage lose or be denied certain accreditation. We've seen private Christian schools receive human rights complaints as well. So there is what seems to be a clash of religious freedom versus equality rights on the basis of sexual orientation.
Now, Greg, at the moment we're voting for a blank cheque, aren't we? In that we've got no idea about the legislative process by which these religious freedom issues might be addressed. For instance, in Britain today, there's a student going through the court system to try and get himself reinstated into his social work course. He was kicked out because they said as a supporter of traditional marriage he wouldn't be suitable as a social worker, which is just ridiculous. And his views about marriage became known because he was defending or supporting, expressing sympathy for a person in the United States who was jailed, actually jailed, for refusing work duty in certifying a same-sex marriage somewhere in the Midwest. So there are massive consequences here in terms of legal protections. We don't know what's going to happen in the Parliament. What do you think should happen?
Well, looking at overseas and also in Australia, there's risks to freedom of speech. We see that already in Australia. In Tasmania, Archbishop Porteous was taken before the Human Rights Tribunal there. The conciliation was unsuccessful and the complainant withdrew the complaint, but by that stage it had already gone through the conciliation stage, so there'd been considerable legal costs incurred by Archbishop Porteous, also considerable time costs, and it could have gone on to the tribunal. So there's a real risk we already see for freedom of speech, and we can see that in jurisdictions overseas as well. There's concerns regarding freedom of religion. So as was mentioned in that advertisement, in Canada at the moment, there's a Christian law school that's been refused accreditation because of its views regarding traditional marriage. There's concerns also in England. There was a Jewish school, Vishnit School, that may be denied accreditation because it won't teach transgender issues in a state-approved way. So that's a concern. And there's also employment concerns as well. So in Australia, we see this already. At the ACT, there was the case very recently where the young girl who put up on her Facebook page the indication that she was supportive of traditional marriage. She was fired from her employment for that. And that's the case even before marriage is actually introduced. In the US, in the UK, in Canada, there's many cases now where people have been sued under discrimination law for their views on traditional marriage. There's involved bakers who don't want to bake a cake. And often this isn't just baking an ordinary cake, it's actually a creative work. If you look at one of the cases, it's Master Cake Shop and something like that.
The guy in Colorado was going to the American Supreme Court.
And if you look at the cake that he actually makes, it's not some kind of chocolate cake that he puts in the oven. It's a work of art that he puts into it. And so his view is he's being forced to direct his artistic skills to support a political or an ethical cause that he doesn't agree with, that he considers contrary to his conscience, contrary to his religion. And so there's the bakers, there's the florists, there's photographers, there's people who don't want to use their creative expertise to support a cause that they don't agree with. And so that's a concern that we see overseas. There's also the boycotts, which is a concern. We see that already in Australia. We saw that with Cooper's Brewery, how they were boycotted for supporting, or at least their involvement with the Bible Society, which was holding that. If you look at the debate, it's a very civil debate between the two parliamentarians on what our laws should be regarding marriage. And so there's a boycott there. There's a boycott against Stephen Chavur and Mark Allenby because they had an association with an organisation that was involved with the Australian Christian lobby. So we already see considerable pressure being brought to people in their employment because of their views on marriage.
Yeah, it's a long list.
So much for freedom of speech, huh?
Well, it's a major concern, Sam. We don't know what the Parliament's going to do. It's private members' business. Will this be a Senate bill, a House bill? Will there be conflict between the two chambers? Will Liberals cross the floor? Will Labor get the numbers in the Senate? It's totally unformed and totally unknown as to what's going to happen. But we've run out of time, unfortunately. For our panel, I want to thank you very much, Greg, for joining us here for the first time. You too, Sam. We're on a Friday morning. You normally ask me the questions. I've got to say how nice it was to ask you. Hopefully it was pain-free for you.
You're very polite. You're much more polite than I usually am to you. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, that's nice of you to say that. People who know me know my politeness. It's well recognised right around the country.
For that.
Okay, maybe not. Thanks for watching. We'll be back in a short moment with Zeg's cartoon take on the week. Welcome back, where it's that part of the show where we look at the creative genius of Zeg, our cartoonist in residence. His first cartoon's reflecting on the fact that Tasmanian Labor Senator Helen Poley has been pressured inside the Labor Party to say that she's quite keen on same-sex marriage, even though she's an opponent, and voting no. So internal pressure there, some of the heavies in the Labor Party. And this poor journalist sitting on the bench there seeing the doctor. The doctor says, so, you're running a story about an ALP senator, you've suggested that. The senator's being pressured by ALP ministers to say that she'll be voting yes even though she's not. You want to run that story? And the poor new journalist there, he's new to the mainstream media and it's his first week in the TV news. He didn't know about it because it has been a story that deserved more prominence, that you've got these standover tactics inside the Australian Labor Party. And Zeg's second contribution looks at the tragedy in Las Vegas. Such a terrible, terrible, senseless loss of life. Our sympathy, our thoughts go out to the families of the victims and of course those who are wounded, over 500, hoping they can make healthy recoveries. And Zeg just listing all the things, the social decay and problems that lead to this kind of tragedy, on top of the obvious issues about gun control and gun law reform. The roots of evil. Zeg's listed them there and he's spot on in every respect. So thanks, Zeg, for your contribution. And thanks also to the viewers who've sent in thoughts for the Outsiders Outhouse. You'll see Zeg's take there. I'm on the Thunderbox. The Outhouse, the ultimate place of freedom, still remaining in our wonderful country. And you can write in your thoughts about the show and all the issues to mark.latham@rnnmail.com. That's the email address, mark.latham@rnnmail.com. Love to hear your point of view. And this week we have excellent contributions from three of the viewers. The first is from a Macquarie University student in New South Wales who remains nameless for obvious reasons, and he writes as follows. Recently I had my graduation for my degree in politics and I wanted to get the contact details of the Vice-Chancellor to formally complain about the speech presented by the gay activist Professor Dennis Altman from La Trobe University for the conferring of his honorary doctorate. He went on and on insulting Donald Trump, labelling him a madman, which drew the cheap laughter you expect, I suppose, in addition to all the other textbook propaganda. And our student wrote this to his Vice-Chancellor. The bias and insulting comments towards Conservative politician, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, was disgraceful. Is Macquarie University about honouring people like Altman with such a bias? I want to suggest if that's so, I will take it to the media to demonstrate how such closed-minded opinions are at the forefront of Macquarie University. It didn't need to be said with a direct insult to the people who are conservative. Macquarie University clearly demonstrated an unacceptable act in this instance, and if this is condoned, I'll be escalating it. End of the letter. What do you think, Mark? Preferably like to have my name left out of it because I work in a so-called inclusive job, and if it were to be public, I could lose my employment. Well, I sympathise with your situation. Go hard. I don't see why at a university address a president from another country needs to be demonised this way. But Dennis Altman, we know him as a Trump deranged commentator. It's Trump derangement syndrome all over the world for the snowflake lefties. They can't handle Trump in every single respect, and unfortunately this leftist beehive of activity at the Macquarie University has reflected that. Again, in terms of Trump derangement syndrome, we've got a letter from Mark Harrison, who has watched with disbelief as Melania Trump's donation of Dr. Seuss books weren't accepted by a Massachusetts elementary school librarian due to their racist nature. How ridiculous. I've just bought these books for my 6-year-old son Oscar to enjoy and couldn't, even by the idiotic leftist PC standards of today, see how they are even close to being racist. As I sat reading him Hop on Pop that I bought from a shop, I was wondering where this left lunacy will ever stop. Well done, Mark. You're a great heir to the wonderful Dr. Seuss. P.S. Keep up the great work with the show. It's simply refreshing. Well, I've got to say, Mark, my namesake there, I empathise with you. Some of the most enjoyable moments of my parenthood were reading Dr. Seuss books, most notably Green Eggs and Ham to my 2 sons and daughter. I'm buggered if I know what's racist about them. This is just Trump derangement syndrome from the librarian. Michelle Obama donated Dr. Seuss books, read them out to students. No one said that was racist coming from her. How could it be racist with the donation by Melania Trump? And this is just the demonisation of Dr. Seuss. Who would have thought? Green Eggs and Ham, I love them, Sam, I am. Could be racist. What, the eggs weren't really green? We knew that. It's just a kid's book and so enjoyable, so rhythmical in the way it's presented. We love Dr. Seuss, and the imbecile in Massachusetts should wake up to herself. And finally, from Gary in Penrith, New South Wales, this is a very telling letter about a recent controversy in Australia. I'm involved with a junior rugby league club in our district, helping out with the fundraising, the canteen, the raffles, etc., to try and meet our expenses for the benefit of youth. Imagine how I feel finding out that the National Rugby League in Australia paid the US rapper Macklemore $500,000 to put out a political message about same-sex marriage at the grand final on Sunday. Imagine the good the money would have done if distributed among junior clubs like ours. Another example of what you call the elites getting out of touch with reality. Well, Gary, you're absolutely spot on. A complete waste of money. Nobody goes to the footy to be involved in politics. They go to watch the footy and be entertained by the wonderful sportsmen on display. So the NRL flushed the money down the drain. They had 300,000 fewer viewers for the grand final on Sunday than the previous year. Politicising football is a losing commercial strategy. When will they wake up to that? That nobody goes to rugby league or any other sport to be political. In fact, they're going to the sport to get away from things like politics. Macklemore had his message, but it was a loser for the NRL and they lost viewers, and the money would have been better spent out Penrith way on junior rugby league clubs which are otherwise selling the raffle tickets and selling the sausage sandwiches through the canteen, struggling to make ends meet. And that takes us to our left lunatic of the week, who is Macklemore. He thought he was doing some big thing contributing to the Australian political debate. Zeg's got him pinned here. There's Macklemore, the left lunatic of the week. All that money that was spent, it could have produced $105,000 donations to junior rugby league clubs who desperately need that money and support. But I tell you what, Zeg has produced a wonderful gallery there of left lunatics. I mean, you've really got the pick of the crop, haven't you? From Van Batten to Sam Dastiari to Tim Soutphommasane, Warren Ench, Clementine Ford. I mean, we're running out of space to fit all these lunatics in, but let me just say, viewers, there's plenty more to come. There's plenty out there. We push back against them and their cultural Marxism, their divisive identity politics every week. Thanks for joining us on Mark Latham's Outsiders. We'll be back next Wednesday, going live at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Summer Time. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching, and have a great week in the time ahead.